10 years had passed since the end of the war. A decade since Operation Endgame had shattered the Overlord Empire and nearly broken humanity in the process. The galaxy was a different place now, and so was humanity. Admiral Hedgen stood at the memorial wall on Earth, running her fingers over the names carved into black stone. There were billions of names, far too many to read in a lifetime, but she tried anyway, reading as many as she could each time she visited. It was the least she could do for the dead. Admiral Tayman's name was there, along with thousands of other naval personnel. Captain Jiwan's squadron, all 7 pilots who had died in the final battle. The 50 million people from Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani who had been sacrificed. Every name represented a life, a story, a person who would never see the peace they had died to create. Was it worth it? A voice asked behind her. Hedgen turned to see President Sung-ho, looking older than his years, his hair completely white now. He visited the memorial often, she knew. Probably more than anyone else, I don't know, she admitted. We're alive. That has to mean something, does it? Sung-ho looked at the wall with hollow eyes. I ordered 50 million people to die. I sentenced them to death to save everyone else. How do I live with that? Hedgen had no answer. Some questions didn't have answers. Some burdens couldn't be shared or lightened. They could only be carried until death finally brought release. The 3 surviving human systems, Sol, Alpha Centauri, and Sirius, had become the foundation of a new civilization. They called it the Terran Union, though some called it the Fortress Worlds. Every citizen was trained in combat from childhood. Every ship, even civilian ones, carried weapons. Every station, every colony, every asteroid habitat was designed to be defended. Humanity had learned a terrible lesson. The galaxy was not a place of peace. It was a place of violence where the strong preyed on the weak, and mercy was a luxury that could get you killed. Admiral Hedgen commanded what remained of the human fleet, now called the Never Again Fleet. She had established protocols that made other nations nervous. Any unknown vessel approaching human space was warned once and then destroyed. Any alien transmission was analyzed for threats before a response was sent. Any planet humanity colonized was fortified to the point of paranoia. We will never be victims again, she told her officers during their first official briefing. We will never be caught unprepared. We will never rely on the kindness of strangers. From this day forward, humanity stands ready for war at all times. It was a dark philosophy, but it was the philosophy of a species that had nearly been exterminated. Dr. Hana and Dr. Yuna worked together at what they called the Xenocide Warning Network, a massive sensor array that monitored the entire local galactic region for any sign of the Overlords or similar threats. They had stations in the dead zones, automated probes scattered across 1,000 light-years, and analysis systems that never slept. We've detected 17 separate fragments of the Overlord consciousness, Yuna reported during one of their regular briefings. They're scattered across the galaxy, hiding in deep space, not communicating with each other. I don't think they'll ever reunite, Hana nodded slowly. Good, let them hide. Let them remember what happens when you try to exterminate humanity. But she also felt a strange sadness. The Overlords had been an ancient civilization, millions of years old, with knowledge and technology humanity could barely understand. And humanity had shattered them so completely that they would never recover. We broke them, she said quietly. We took something old and powerful and we destroyed it utterly. They tried to destroy us first, Yuna reminded her. Don't feel guilty for surviving. Engineer Kyung never returned to engineering. After the war, she retired to a small farm on Mars, growing vegetables and trying to forget everything she had built. The entropy bombs haunted her dreams. She could still see the stars dying, the systems going dark, the price of survival measured in astronomical death. She rarely talked to anyone, but sometimes young engineers would come to her, asking for advice or wisdom. She always told them the same thing. Build things that help people live, not weapons that help them kill. I spent 7 years building death, and it nearly killed my soul. Corporal Nari became the head of the Terran Marine Corps, training every new soldier in the tactics that had won the war. She taught them to be unpredictable, to embrace chaos, to fight dirty when fighting fair would get them killed. War isn't about honor, she told her recruits. It's about survival. You want to survive? Then be willing to do whatever it takes. The enemy won't show you mercy, so don't waste time showing them any. Her words were harsh, but they kept soldiers alive, and in the end, that was what mattered. Captain Ji-won never flew again. The war had taken everything from her. Her friends, her innocence, her joy in flight. She became a trainer, teaching new pilots the skills they would need if the Overlords or something worse ever returned. One day, a young cadet asked her what it had been like, fighting in the war. Ji-won was quiet for a long time before answering. "It was hell," she said finally. "Every day I woke up knowing I might die. Every mission I flew, I said goodbye to friends who might not come back. And most of them didn't. Daehan, my wingman, saved my life by giving his. I watched hundreds of good people die in explosions and battles and missions that went wrong. The war took everything from me." The cadet looked uncertain. "But you won. Doesn't that make it worth it?" Ji-won looked out the window at the stars where 30 dark zones marked the places where systems used to shine. "We didn't win," she said quietly. "We survived. There's a difference. Winning would mean we came out better than we went in. Instead, we came out scarred and broken and harder than we ever wanted to be. But yes, it was worth it, because we're still here, because humanity endures, because we refuse to die quietly." She turned back to the cadet. "That's what you need to remember. Not that we won some glorious victory, but that we survived something that should have killed us. And if we had to do it again, we would. That's what it means to be human." The cadet nodded, not fully understanding, but one day they would. Everyone would. It was the lesson written in broken star systems and shattered empires. Word of humanity's victory spread slowly through the galaxy. Other civilizations, some old, some young, heard about what had happened. They heard about a young species that had faced beings of immeasurable power and fought them to a standstill. They heard about the Overlords fleeing in terror from a species they had thought to crush easily. New transmissions started arriving in human space. Offers of trade, requests for alliances, messages of respect from civilizations that had hidden from the Overlords for millennia. Admiral Hyejin read each one carefully, looking for threats, analyzing each word for hidden meanings. Trust didn't come easily anymore. But some of the messages were genuine. One transmission from a species calling themselves the Kevar was particularly moving. "We watched your war from afar. We watched you refuse to surrender. We watched you break something we thought was unbreakable. Thank you for showing us that resistance is possible." President Chung-ho, in his final act before retiring, established the Memorial Worlds. In each of the 30 dead zones where stars had died and systems had gone dark, humanity built monuments. Giant structures made of reinforced stone, covered in the names of everyone who had died in the war. "They will stand for millions of years," he said during the dedication ceremony. "Long after we're all gone, long after humanity itself has passed into history, these monuments will remain. And anyone who finds them will know, here died the price of human survival." On Earth, a young child who had been born after the war ended approached Captain Ji-won at a public event. "Ma'am," the child said politely, "my teacher says you're a war hero, that you fought the Overlords." Ji-won knelt down to the child's level. "Yes, I did. Was it worth it? Winning, I mean." It was the same question everyone asked, the question that haunted every survivor. Ji-won looked at the child, seeing innocence and hope in eyes that had never known the terror of war. "We didn't win," she said gently. "We survived. And sometimes, that's all you can do. But yes, it was worth it. Because you're here. Because your parents are here. Because humanity still exists. We paid a terrible price, but we're still standing." The child thought about this, then nodded solemnly. "My grandma died in the war. In Tau Ceti." Ji-won felt her heart break a little more. "I'm sorry. She was brave. Everyone in Tau Ceti was brave. They died so you could live." "I know," the child said. "That's why I want to join the fleet when I grow up. To make sure what happened never happens again." Ji-won smiled sadly. Another generation preparing for war. Unable to know peace because peace had proven to be a lie. But maybe that was the price of survival. Maybe that was what it meant to endure. Across the galaxy, in the dark spaces between stars, the scattered fragments of the Overlord consciousness hid and healed and remembered. They would never reunite, never again be the powerful force they once were. Humanity had seen to that, but they remembered. And in their fragmented thoughts, one idea persisted. Avoid the Sol system. Avoid the humans. They don't surrender. They don't forget. and they will break the galaxy itself before they break themselves. It was a warning that would echo through galactic civilization for millennia. 7 years of war had changed everything. Humanity was down to 5 star systems: Sol, Alpha Centauri, Tau Ceti, Epsilon Eridani, and Sirius. 5 systems out of the 47 they had started with. But something strange was happening. The Overlords had stopped advancing. President Seung-ho sat in his office on Earth looking at reports that didn't make sense. The Overlords had the strength to push forward, to take those final 5 systems. But they weren't moving. For 3 months they had held position at the edges of human space doing nothing. What are they waiting for? He asked Admiral Hyojin during their daily briefing. I don't know, she admitted. Our scouts report that their ships are still there, still active. But they're not attacking. It's like they're frozen. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yuna, a neuroscientist who had been studying the Overlord collective consciousness, had made a breakthrough. She had found a way to listen to their communications, not just intercept them, but actually understand them on a deeper level. What she heard terrified and amazed her in equal measure. They're arguing, she told the assembled military leadership, her voice barely above a whisper. The Overlords, I mean. They're fighting among themselves. Admiral Taemin, present at the meeting despite his injury, leaned forward. Explain. Yuna pulled up data on the main screen. The Overlord consciousness isn't a single unified mind anymore. 7 years of losses, 7 years of fighting an enemy that refuses to follow any logical pattern. It's breaking them apart. Some nodes want to exterminate humanity at any cost. Other nodes want to retreat and never come back. They're experiencing something their consciousness was never designed to handle. What? President Seung-ho asked. Doubt, Yuna said simply. They're doubting themselves. They're doubting whether they can win. They're doubting whether winning is worth the cost. Their entire collective is fracturing because of us. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Humanity had done more than just survive. They had wounded their enemy in a way that went beyond ships and soldiers. They had broken the Overlord's certainty, their sense of inevitable victory. Commander Bora led the Ghost Fleet, a special operations unit that officially didn't exist. Her ships were equipped with stealth technology salvaged from destroyed Overlord vessels and modified by Engineer Kyung. They could slip into Overlord-controlled space undetected, and they had been doing exactly that for months now. Armed with Dr. Yuna's discovery, Bora saw an opportunity. If the Overlords were already fighting among themselves, humanity could make it worse. We're going to seed chaos, she explained to her captains. We'll broadcast captured Overlord distress signals deep in their territory. We'll make them see threats that don't exist. We'll turn their paranoia against them. It was psychological warfare on a galactic scale, and it worked better than anyone expected. Overlord ships began firing on each other, unable to distinguish real threats from phantom ones. Their fleet coordination, which had been perfect for millions of years, fell apart. Supply lines became confused. Orders contradicted each other. The Overlord consciousness, already fracturing, began to shatter. But President Seung-ho knew this wasn't enough. The Overlords were wounded, but wounded animals were dangerous. If humanity wanted to survive, they needed to end this war decisively. He called a meeting of every surviving military leader, scientist, and government official. What they discussed in that room would determine the fate of both species. Scientist Junho has refined the entropy bomb, Seung-ho began, his face grim. We can build 30 of them. Enough to hit every major Overlord staging area simultaneously. It would cripple their fleet, maybe destroy it entirely. Admiral Hyojin knew what was coming next. What's the cost? Yunyo stood and everyone could see the weight of what he carried. 30 star systems will become dead zones. We'll have to sacrifice 2 systems that still have human colonies, Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. 50 million people that we can't evacuate in time. The room erupted in argument. Some said it was murder, that humanity would become the monsters they were fighting. Others said it was necessary, that 50 million lives were worth saving the remaining 25 billion. The debate raged for hours. Finally, President Seung-ho raised his hand for silence. I know what we have to do, he said quietly. I know it will haunt me until the day I die. But if we don't do this, everyone dies. All 25 billion of us. At least this way, most of humanity survives. He looked around the room at the faces of people who had fought for 7 years, who had lost everything and kept fighting anyway. We proceed with Operation Endgame. The announcement to the colonies in Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani was the hardest thing President Sung-O ever had to do. He appeared on every screen in both systems and told them the truth. We cannot save you. In 3 days, weapons will be deployed in your systems that will destroy the Overlord presence there. But they will also destroy everything else. I'm so sorry. You have 3 days to make peace with what's coming. Some people rioted. Some prayed. Some simply spent their last days with their families, holding them close and trying to memorize every moment. On Tau Ceti Prime, a young girl asked her mother why the sky was going to go dark. Because we're going to save everyone else, her mother said, tears streaming down her face. We're going to be heroes. Admiral Taemin volunteered to lead the final assault. Admiral Hyejin refused at first, but he was insistent. I've been fighting this war since the first day, he said, his voice firm despite his missing arm. Let me finish it. Hyejin finally agreed, knowing she would probably never see him again. Captain Ji-won led the fighter screen for Operation Endgame. Her squadron was down to just 7 pilots, all of them veterans who had survived 7 years of hell. They all knew it was a one-way mission. None of them cared anymore. Engineer Kyung commanded one of the bomb deployment ships. She had spent 7 years building weapons to kill gods. Now she would see her work completed. Corporal Nari and her Marines prepared to board Overlord command ships and cause as much chaos as possible, giving the bomb ships time to reach their targets. Dr. Hana transmitted a final message into the Overlord network. Just 3 words broadcast across every frequency. You could have left us alone. The operation launched simultaneously across 100 light-years. 30 entropy bombs activated in 30 systems, each one fed by the death of a star. The Overlord fleet, caught between internal conflict and external assault, tried to respond but couldn't organize a coherent defense. For 3 days, the galaxy burned. Admiral Taemin's ship, the New Indomitable, caught the edge of an entropy field when an Overlord ship exploded too close. The temporal distortion shredded his vessel, but he managed to send one final transmission before the end. Worth it, he said, and then there was only static. Captain Ji-won watched from her fighter as the Overlord motherships aged and crumbled. She had survived against all odds, but her entire squadron was gone. 7 pilots who had flown with her to the end, all dead in the final battle. She floated alone in her damaged fighter, watching the stars slowly reappear as the battle ended, and she wept for everyone they had lost. Engineer Kyung's ship limped back to Seoul, barely holding together. She had deployed her bomb successfully, but the return journey had nearly killed her. She didn't care. It was done. It was finally done. Corporal Nari was found 3 weeks later, the only survivor of her entire Marine unit, trapped in the wreckage of an Overlord command ship. They had completed their mission, giving the bomb ships the time they needed. The Overlords fled. Their collective consciousness, shattered beyond repair, split into thousands of fragments that scattered in all directions. The ships that remained functional jumped to random coordinates, trying to escape the species that had broken them. Humanity had won. But as President Seung-ho looked at the casualty reports, he wondered if anyone could truly call this victory. 50 million people dead in the final operation. Admiral Taemin gone. Thousands of soldiers lost. 30 star systems rendered uninhabitable for centuries. They had saved humanity. But at what cost? 5 years into the war, humanity held exactly 12 star systems. Everything else had been taken or destroyed. But those 12 systems had become something the Overlords had never encountered before. Fortresses built by a species with nothing left to lose. Admiral Hyejin stood in the war room on Mars, looking at the strategic display with eyes that had seen too much death. She had been promoted after Admiral Taemin lost his right arm defending the Sol system from an Overlord assault. He was alive, recovering in a medical facility on Earth, but his fighting days were over. The war had chewed through so many good people. Show me the latest casualty reports, she said quietly. The numbers appeared on her screen. Humanity had started the war with a population of 42 billion across all colonies. Now they had 28 billion, crammed into 12 systems that groaned under the weight of refugees and desperation. 14 billion people dead in 5 years. It was a number so large it lost all meaning, but humanity was still here. That had to count for something. Scientist Junho worked in a hidden research facility carved into an asteroid in the Kuiper Belt. He was a physicist, and before the war, He had been working on theoretical problems about the nature of time. Now he was working on something very different, a weapon that could kill gods. The entropy bomb, as it came to be called, didn't destroy matter. It accelerated time in a localized field. Anything caught in the field would age thousands, millions, even billions of years in seconds. The Overlord ships, made of living metal that could regenerate, would simply age to death faster than they could repair themselves. The problem was power. The device needed enormous amounts of energy, more than any ship could generate. It needed a star. "We can do it," Junho explained to Admiral Hyejin during a secure communication. "But it will consume an entire star's output for several hours. The system where we use it will become uninhabitable. Maybe for centuries. Maybe forever." Hyejin looked at the scientist's tired face on her screen. "How many Overlord ships can it destroy?" In testing simulations, a single bomb with a star's output could take out everything in a 10 light-minute radius. If we catch them in a cluster, maybe 5 to 10 of their capital ships. 5 to 10 ships for an entire star system. It was a devil's bargain. But humanity had already made so many of those. What was one more? "Build it," she ordered. Corporal Nari had never expected to become famous, but war made heroes out of ordinary people. She led a marine unit defending the city of New Sol on Proxima Centauri b, one of humanity's oldest colonies. The Overlords had landed ground forces there, trying to take the planet intact for once instead of simply destroying it from orbit. It was a mistake on their part. Nari and her Marines knew the city like they knew their own hands. Every street, every building, every sewer tunnel. They turned the entire urban area into a death trap. The Overlords had adaptive technology, but Nari used the one thing they couldn't adapt to: complete unpredictability. She would attack at dawn one day and midnight the next. She would use explosives one week and melee weapons the next. She would set elaborate traps that made no tactical sense, ambushes that any logical military mind would dismiss as impossible, and because they made no sense, they worked. 6 months. She held New Sol for 6 months against constant Overlord assault. By the time reinforcements arrived, her unit of 200 Marines had been reduced to 37. But they had killed thousands of Overlord drones and damaged 3 of their ground assault ships badly enough that they had to retreat for repairs. When asked how she did it, Nari simply said, "I stopped trying to fight smart and started fighting crazy. Turns out crazy is hard to predict." Admiral Hyejin adopted Nari's philosophy on a fleet-wide scale. Human ships stopped operating in organized formations. Captains were given autonomy to engage however they saw fit. Entire fleets would disappear into dead zones, regions of space so filled with radiation and debris that sensors couldn't track them, only to emerge at random locations and strike Overlord supply lines. The Overlords had spent millions of years perfecting warfare. They knew every strategy, every tactic, every logical approach to combat, but they had never fought an enemy willing to embrace chaos as a weapon. In the 6th year of the war, Captain Ji-Wan led a raid on an Overlord communication hub. Her squadron had been reduced over the years, pilots dying one by one, but she kept flying. She had to. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering all the faces of the dead. During the raid, they captured an intact Overlord data core. Dr. Hana spent 3 weeks decrypting it, and what she found changed everything. "They're calling for reinforcements," she told Admiral Hyejin, her voice shaking with something between fear and excitement. "The Overlords, I mean. They're sending messages to other Overlord fleets, thousands of light years away, asking for help. They've never done that before." Hyejin leaned forward. "Why?" "Because we're hurting them. Really hurting them. Every ship we destroy, every drone we kill, it's like ripping away a piece of their collective consciousness. They're not just losing resources, they're losing themselves, and it's starting to scare them." The Admiral sat back in her chair, processing this. The Overlords were afraid. An ancient empire that had conquered countless worlds was afraid of humanity. It was the best news they had received since the war began. Scientist Junho completed the first entropy bomb in year 7. They deployed it in the Barnard star system, which the Overlords had turned into a major staging area. Admiral Taman, despite having only one arm, insisted on being there to see it. The bomb activated. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then space itself seemed to shimmer and twist. The Overlord ships caught in the field began to age. Their living metal, which had regenerated from every injury, turned gray and brittle. It cracked and fell apart like ancient stone. In 17 seconds, 3 Overlord motherships and 8 support vessels aged 10 million years and crumbled into cosmic dust. The human ships, protected by a specially designed shield, watched from outside the field. Everyone on every bridge stood in silence, witnessing something that looked like the hand of an angry god, reaching down to smite its enemies. "Well," Admiral Taman said into the stunned silence. That worked, but he also looked at the star, which had dimmed noticeably. The system was dying. In a few centuries, that star would go cold. Any planets orbiting it would become frozen rocks drifting in the dark. "The price keeps going up," he whispered, though no one heard him. The Overlords responded to the entropy bomb with fury. They launched their largest assault yet, throwing nearly 100 ships at the Sol system, trying to end the war by destroying humanity's homeworld. It was the biggest battle of the war, and it raged for 4 days across the entire solar system. Admiral Hyegen threw everything humanity had into the defense. Ships that could barely fly, weapons that might explode on their users, tactics that made no sense to anyone except the humans using them. Corporal Nari's Marines boarded Overlord ships and fought hand-to-hand in their corridors. Engineer Kyung's frequency-shifting weapons tore through Overlord shields. Captain Jiwon flew for 40 hours straight, sleeping in her cockpit between engagements, Earth's sky filled with fire. The moon took direct hits that left craters visible from the planet's surface. Mars lost 3 of its major cities to orbital bombardment, but humanity held. When the Overlords finally retreated, they left behind 37 destroyed ships. Humanity lost over 100 vessels and 3 billion people died in the crossfire, but Earth still stood. The Sol system still belonged to humanity. In the aftermath, Admiral Hyegen addressed the survivors across all remaining human space. "They threw everything at us, and we're still here. They keep expecting us to break, to surrender, to accept defeat. But I want to tell you something about humanity. We don't break. We bend, we crack, we bleed, but we don't break. And every day we survive is another day we make them regret starting this war." Across the 12 remaining human systems, people heard those words and felt something that had become rare: hope. Not hope for peace, not hope for easy victory, but hope that maybe, just maybe, they could hurt their enemies enough to make them stop. The Overlords had conquered 1,000,000 worlds over 1,000,000 years, but they had never met humanity before. And humanity was teaching them what it meant to face a species that would rather die standing than live kneeling. The stars had never seemed so cold as they did on the day humanity learned they were not alone in the universe. Commander Taemin stood on the bridge of the UCS Indomitable, humanity's largest warship, watching the sensor screens with growing concern. Something massive had just appeared at the edge of the Kepler system, something that shouldn't exist according to every law of physics humanity understood. The object was huge, easily the size of Earth's moon, and it was moving toward the inner planets with impossible speed. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," said the communications officer, her voice shaking slightly. "It's in every human language simultaneously. The message played across every speaker, every screen, every communication device in human space at the exact same moment." The voice was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It simply was, "Submit or perish," that was all. 2 words that changed everything. Ambassador Minho was already at Kepler Station, humanity's largest research facility, when the message arrived. He was a man who had spent 30 years resolving conflicts between Earth and its colonies. A man who believed that any problem could be solved through dialogue and understanding. He immediately requested a channel to respond to the alien vessel. "This is Ambassador Minho of Earth's United Nations. We come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic relations. Please let us talk." The response came not in words, but in action. A beam of light, if it could be called that, lanced out from the alien vessel. It touched Kepler Station for less than a second. The station, home to 12,000 scientists and their families, simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris field, no survivors. It was there, and then it was not. As if someone had erased it from reality itself. Dr. Hana had been aboard a small research ship 3 light minutes away from Kepler Station, collecting samples from a nearby nebula. She saw the flash on her sensors, saw the station's signal vanish from her displays. At first, she thought it was an equipment malfunction. Then the automated distress beacon should have activated, but there was nothing. Just silence where 12,000 voices had been moments before. She tried to call her colleagues, her friends, her husband who worked in the biology section. The communication channels were empty. Kepler Station was gone, and with it everyone she loved. Commander Taman watched the destruction from the Indomitable, and something cold settled in his chest. These beings, whoever they were, had just committed an act of war. He immediately sent out the call to every human military vessel within range. If these aliens wanted a fight, humanity would give them one. The Battle of Arcturus Prime began 3 hours later. 47 human warships, representing 60% of humanity's total military strength, converged on the alien vessel. They came prepared for war, their weapons charged, their shields at maximum, their crews ready to defend humanity's right to exist. It was a massacre. The alien vessel, which humanity would later call an Overlord mothership, barely seemed to notice the human attack. Missiles that should have torn through armor simply vanished before impact. Energy weapons bent around the ship as if space itself refused to let them through. The few shots that did land seemed to damage the hull, but the metal rippled and flowed like liquid, repairing itself in seconds. Then the Overlords returned fire. Captain G1 flew her fighter through a hell of dying ships and screaming metal. She had 200 hours of combat experience, all of it in war games and training simulations. Nothing had prepared her for this. The Overlord weapons didn't just destroy ships, they unmade them. She watched the UCS Valiant, a cruiser with 800 crew, come apart at the molecular level, its atoms scattering into the void like dust in wind. All fighters, pattern Delta 7, she shouted into her communication system, trying to maintain some kind of order in the chaos. Hit them from multiple angles, don't give them a single target. It didn't matter. The Overlord ship released thousands of combat drones, each one the size of a fighter but moving within human precision. They adapted to human tactics in real time, learning from every engagement. What worked once never worked twice. G1's wingman, a young pilot named Dehan, managed to land a hit on one of the drones, destroying it with a lucky shot. He barely had time to celebrate before 3 more drones locked onto him. His fighter exploded in a ball of superheated plasma. Dehan, G1 screamed, but there was no response. There never would be again. Commander Taman watched his fleet die around him. In 3 hours, humanity lost 19 warships and over 15,000 personnel. The Overlord vessel hadn't even been scratched in any meaningful way. This wasn't a battle. This was an extermination. Sir, we need to retreat, his tactical officer said, his face pale. We can't win this. Taman knew he was right, but the thought of running burned in his throat. Still, dying here would accomplish nothing. He gave the order to fall back, and the surviving human ship scattered, jumping to faster-than-light speed and fleeing in all directions. The Overlord vessel didn't pursue. It simply continued its slow, inevitable advance toward humanity's core systems. The message was clear. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Submission or extinction were the only choices. But as Commander Taman sat in his command chair, watching the casualty reports flood in, he felt something crystallize inside him. It wasn't hope exactly. It was something harder, something sharper. Open a channel, he ordered. All human frequencies, maximum broadcast power. When the channel opened, he spoke slowly and clearly, his voice carrying to every human colony, every station, every ship in space. This is Commander Taman of the United Colonial Fleet. Today we learned that we are not alone in the universe. Today we learned that there are beings out there who see us as nothing more than insects to be crushed. They expect us to surrender. They expect us to bow down and accept whatever fate they choose for us. He paused, letting his words sink in across the light years. I have a different message for them. Humanity has faced extinction before. We've faced ice ages and plagues, wars and disasters, and we're still here. We don't know how to quit. We don't know how to give up. So if these aliens want to destroy us, they're going to have to work for it. Every system, every planet, every station will fight. And if we're going to die, we'll make damn sure they remember us. Across human space, on ships and stations and colony worlds, people heard those words. Some felt fear, some felt despair, but many felt something else. They felt the same hard, sharp thing that had crystallized in their commander's heart. Defiance. The Overlords had expected a quick conquest. Instead, they had started a war that would break the galaxy itself, and they had no idea what they had just awakened. The war had been going on for 8 months, and humanity was losing. Slowly, steadily, inevitably, the Overlords pushed deeper into human space, taking system after system. But they weren't winning easily. And that fact alone was starting to mean something. Engineer Kyung worked in a civilian shipyard orbiting Mars, a facility that had been building cargo haulers and passenger ships before the war. Now it built nothing but weapons and warships, working around the clock to replace humanity's losses. She was exhausted, having slept maybe 10 hours in the last week. But sleep felt like a luxury humanity couldn't afford. She was watching combat footage for the 100th time, studying the way Overlord shields deflected human weapons. There was something there, something she couldn't quite see but knew existed. The Overlords adapted to every weapon, every tactic, but adaptation took time. There had to be a delay, even a tiny one. "Run that back," she told the computer, watching a missile strike on an Overlord drone. The shield flickered, stopped the missile, and the wreckage bounced off harmlessly. But there, just for a fraction of a second, the shield had taken time to adjust to the missile's frequency. "0.3 seconds, she whispered. "That's how long it takes them to adapt." It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough to win, but it was something. Kyung spent the next 72 hours designing a new kind of missile. It would change its frequency 3 times during flight, faster than the Overlords could adapt. The first test was promising. The missile hit an Overlord drone and actually damaged it before being destroyed. The second test destroyed the drone completely. It wasn't a miracle weapon, but it was progress. And progress was all humanity had. General Somin commanded the Mars Defense Corps, and she had learned something important about the Overlords. They expected logical warfare. They expected humanity to defend valuable targets, to protect civilians, to fight in ways that made strategic sense. So she stopped doing any of those things. When the Overlords attacked the mining colony on Vesta, Somin evacuated every human and then flooded the tunnels with antimatter bombs. The Overlords took the asteroid, but it exploded the moment their troops went underground, taking 3 of their ships with it. When they advanced on the agricultural world of harvest, she burned every field, poisoned every well, and seeded the soil with self-replicating machines that would make the planet toxic for 1,000 years. Scorched galaxy, she called it. If humanity had to retreat, they would leave nothing behind but ashes and traps. The Overlords kept advancing, but every system cost them time and resources. They had to sweep for traps, check for ambushes, verify that every abandoned station wasn't a bomb waiting to explode. The war that should have been over in months stretched into its 2nd year. Captain Ji-won had changed since the Battle of Arcturus Prime. She had watched too many friends die, had flown through too much debris that used to be ships full of people she knew. Something had broken inside her, or maybe something had been forged. She wasn't sure which, and she wasn't sure it mattered. She led a squadron of fighters on what everyone called suicide runs. They would jump into Overlord-controlled systems, strike fast and hard at whatever targets they could find, and jump out before the Overlords could respond. Most times it worked. Sometimes it didn't, and she lost pilots. Daehan's death still haunted her. He had been her wingman, her friend, and he had died saving her. She couldn't let that mean nothing. So she kept flying, kept fighting, kept making the Overlords pay for every inch of space they took. One day, while refueling at a hidden base in an asteroid field, her squadron intercepted an Overlord communication. Dr. Hana, now working with military intelligence, helped translate it. "They're frustrated," Hana said, her eyes wide with surprise. "Listen to this. They're calling humanity the persistent infestation and requesting additional forces. They expected this to be over by now." Ji-won felt something like savage joy burn in her chest. Good. Let them be frustrated. Let them bleed for every system. Let them learn that humanity didn't quit. "How many ships have we destroyed?" Ji-won asked. Hana checked her data. "Best estimates say we've taken out maybe 200 Overlord vessels of various sizes. They've destroyed almost 1,000 of ours, but we're building more." They're not. It was a brutal equation, but it was one humanity could work with. The Overlords were powerful, but they weren't infinite. Every ship humanity destroyed was one less ship they had. And humanity, it turned out, was very good at building ships quickly when survival was on the line. The war ground on. Humanity lost the Tau Ceti system in month 14. They lost the Epsilon Eridani colonies in month 18. Each loss hurt. Each retreat cost thousands of lives. But humanity kept fighting. Commander Taemin, now promoted to admiral after the previous admiral died defending Earth's moon, coordinated the defense of the remaining colonies. His strategy was simple: make every battle cost the Overlords more than they wanted to pay. Don't try to win, just make them bleed. They're used to species surrendering, he explained to his officers during a strategy session. They've conquered hundreds of worlds, maybe thousands. Every species they've faced has either given up or been wiped out quickly. But we're not giving up and we're not dying quickly. We're doing something they've never experienced before. We're making them work for it. Engineer Keong's frequency-changing weapons were now standard on every human ship. They still couldn't punch through Overlord shields consistently, but they could do damage. Combined with General Soman's scorched galaxy tactics and Captain Jiwan's hit-and-run raids, humanity was becoming a problem the Overlords hadn't anticipated. 3 years into the war, the Overlords made their first major mistake. They tried to take the Sirius system in a single overwhelming assault, throwing 50 of their ships at humanity's defenses. But General Soman had spent 6 months turning Sirius into a trap. Hidden mines, automated weapons platforms, and kamikaze drones filled the system. The Overlords won, but they lost 23 ships doing it. 23 ships. It was the single biggest loss they had taken in the entire war. When the news spread through human space, something changed in the collective consciousness. They were hurting the enemy, really hurting them. It wasn't enough to win, not yet, but it was enough to hope. Dr. Hana made another discovery around this time. She had been studying captured Overlord technology, trying to understand how their ships worked. What she found disturbed her. They're not individuals, she told Admiral Taman during a briefing. Each Overlord ship, each drone, it's all connected to a single massive consciousness. When we destroy a ship, we're not killing a crew. We're damaging the Overlord itself. It's like cutting off a finger or removing a piece of its brain. Taman considered this, so every ship we destroy actually hurts them. Not just strategically, but personally. Exactly. And they're not used to pain. They're not used to being hurt. That's why they're frustrated. That's why they keep sending more ships. They want this to stop, but we won't let it stop. It was a grim satisfaction, but it was satisfaction nonetheless. Humanity was teaching an ancient evil what it felt like to suffer. Captain Jiwan's squadron struck an Overlord supply line in the 4th year of the war. They destroyed 6 cargo vessels and escaped with minimal losses. It was a small victory in a war of small victories, but each one mattered. As she flew back to base, Jiwan thought about Daehan, about all the pilots she had lost. The war had taken so much from everyone, but it hadn't taken everything. Humanity was still here, still fighting, still refusing to die quietly. The Overlords had expected submission or quick extinction. Instead, they got a species that bit and clawed and fought for every scrap of survival. They got a species that would rather burn the galaxy than surrender. And somewhere in the cold calculations of the Overlord consciousness, a new variable appeared. One they had never had to consider before. What if they couldn't win?